I want to welcome you to the Meacham interviews. And today we have Pitt Root, Bill Root, from several places, Colorado and Tucson most recently. Would you like to read a poem for us?
I would very much enjoy that. I'd like to read a poem called White Boots. It's a title poem for White Boots, New and Selected Poems of the West. And this poem, I just will mention it's for James G. Davis. He's a painter, and I don't know if you can see the cover of the book, but this is a painting that he did that led me partly to write the poem. I had just finished at this point writer in residency at Amherst College, which I enjoyed, but I felt also a little isolated, having worked with a kind of a high level of students in terms of income as well as intelligence. I wanted to get back to a working area, and so I went and worked in a mine underground, which was quite a far cry from Amherst, half a mile down. And after I did that, I did it partly because I was invited by a man who heard me read, just in the straight poetry reading, a reading that included a poem about a cave-in. And afterwards he came up to me after that poem and he said, I'm a super at the mines down here. Would you like to come down and investigate them and write a poem about it? Mm-hmm. I said, I would love to, but I'm bound to be in California for the next several months, A year later, I came back broke without a job. I called him up. I said, I don't want to visit. I want to work. And so he said, okay. So I did that for several months. But I couldn't write about it afterwards until it was years afterwards, actually. It was so alien an experience to what I'd had before that it took a painting from my friend who knew about this and lived in that same area to unlock my responses to the poem. So this began as a letter, and it still has something of that feel. White Boots, ghost of the San Manuel mine. In all of the mines in the United States, they have a ghost, and mostly they call it White Boots, for reasons I cannot imagine, but you would be able to see White Boots. As you know, Jim, I did work underground in the same mine you've imagined in your studio, half a mile down, taking wages enough to make it to California, and fool's gold enough to remind me I don't know much, after all. New guys, like myself, still thrilled by the dangers of fire or falling through the dark into a hole, followed by 20 tons of dusty, rumbling ore. We all tried to stay alert each minute of the 8-hour shift. And for a week or two, alert we were. Then habit made us careless as the rest. So we'd pocket our safety glasses, let dust masks dangle from our necks, and sometimes catch each other stepping out across open shafts without first snapping our lanyards to the rusty cables overhead. The buddy system wasn't much observed, so like the rest come break time, I'd kick back alone against the stone wall and light up, flicking my headlamp off so the dark expanded, flooding gently through my eyes. In the distance sometimes, a solitary hunched figure, projecting its small wedge of light, would glide by my line's entrance, tiny as a fly in a tear of ember, from where I watched, invisible and isolate as a stone in outer space or inner space, just some guy. Never saw old White Boots in those days, but often thought how all those men just lost in the sunshine mine must have felt. Poor bastards who lived long enough to feel, long enough to lose everything in their minds but hope, before their air was gone, long after their light. You'd have to kill your light to keep from igniting whatever gases might be seeping from walls. So dark is where you'd be, whether by yourself or in the company of others. In such a dark I had no need of White Boots, my friend, but looking at this image, startling, almost comic, you've drawn from the dark of blinding inks and your own heart, familiar with disaster. I'm reminded now of how it is the living keep hold of the things that bind them to those gone. How gypsies, when a loved one's dying, will help the one failing stay just a little longer by turning a wooden chair upside down between them. On one leg, a live hand, the dying on another, until, ready, it falls free. But the thing is the clasp itself across that final distance, how it allows those things that need saying to be said. That's how it's always seemed to me, with art, I mean. Whether it's paint on canvas or ink on a page, it's the chance for what knows it must die in us to join what knows it will live forever. And knowledge from such a common depth only survives in the light as shadow, as white boots, imago, as a way, meanwhile, to stay in touch while the sun burns on.
Well, as you were reading that, I was reminded of Horace. It's a very Horatian sort of letter, even like Ovid's letters back from exile, where there's a lot of material that's political and sociological that comes in, but then the ultimate, what you get to is that human feeling at the end. It's almost, it allows you to, because you have so many details earlier, and because it's such like a direct address, it allows you to say those bigger things at the end. Right. Almost philosophical ideas that if they were just thrown out there, they'd be sort of, not very interesting or very good. But in the context of the dramatics of the poem, I think that's really, really interesting. And it's also interesting you had to wait so long before you wrote it.
Right.
Is that common with your poems?
No, in fact, and for me that's almost unique, because usually if I'm going to write about it, unless it's childhood stuff, that comes over the years at various points, it'll erupt up. But no, mostly I will respond fairly quickly, certainly within a year, to something if I'm going to write about it. Yeah. But the triggers are often hidden. There's a wonderful book, I'm sure you know, called Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko.
I was just reading that.
Oh, no kidding.
In fact, I was thinking of reading a passage of it from tomorrow night.
Oh, cool. I hope you do. Well, for some years at Hunter College, I was teaching Native American literature, 20th century, and that was one of the books. And one of the things that I loved about that book is how, and also in Housemaid of Dawn by her elder, her book is in a sense in his shadow. But anyway, both of them talk about how ideas given to them in childhood sometimes will mature only at the moment when they need the knowledge that's buried there. It's like a seed, that's in hibernation, and suddenly the heat brings it to. And I think for me, a lot of times poems are that same kind of way. You'll have something that's tucked away, but you don't know when it's going to come to the surface.
Your seeds come from the diverse background from academic to like the mine job and things like that. Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid growing up, I couldn't figure out anything that would make me want to grow up. Because, jobs, all the jobs that I knew of bored me, and I didn't understand them. Absolutely, I couldn't understand why people would work at those jobs. And my father explained it to me very frankly, so they could eat. But that wasn't much of an argument for me. And so he was killed when I was about 11. And after that, I remember fretting growing up because I figured I was going to have to help, survive and help my mother and so on and so on. But I couldn't figure out anything I wanted to do. Worked in a shipyard just after high school. Hated it, but had the good luck to have been forced into the union. So when they struck, that summer, I didn't have to work, but I did make enough income to go to college. So I went. I loved college. I loved the life of ideas and so on being taken seriously by people who were fun. Got out. Started in academia after graduate school and all that, and I found it was really easy. I was good enough at it that I didn't have to worry about working anymore. But I looked around me and I thought, I don't want to do this forever. I don't want to be 50 years down the road and have been standing in classrooms all my life. So I began going back and forth between that and various blue-collar jobs of one kind or another, and which I'd done as an undergraduate because I didn't really have money. So I would, work in a warehouse, work in shipyard, whatever, and come to school. And I enjoyed both of them. I loved the school, but to my surprise, I also loved getting out of school and going to those places.
It's interesting that, you know, some of the ways that we get out of the academic world is when we go to conferences and things.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I think it's mostly the conferences overseas that escape the academic part, because most of the writers there don't have an academic background.
Right.
And we first met, in fact, in a conference in Macedonia.
Yes, we
which
did.
was really, when was that, 2000?
That was about 2000, 2001,
Yeah. Although, as I mentioned to you before, that I had met you earlier in reading, by chance, a book called The Storm when I was still an undergraduate, which was amazing. And then to have met you later on was kind of crazy.
Well, you mentioned also that one of the other books that you were carrying around at that time was The Lice.
The Lice,
Merwin's book, which I was reading at the same time you were carrying around with my book. I mean, that was like, wow, it's a beautiful coincidence.
Yeah, there's something in the air, probably.
Yes. And I noticed at that conference, we met briefly at the beginning of the conference, and this is where hundreds of poets from all over the world, really. But we didn't actually get together again until after the conference when we went to the airport.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like Rick's Cafe, but crossed with a mortuary.
Right.
You know, because there was nobody there, and there were just flies all over the place as we waited for a plane that was, of course, fortunately late, because we got to know each other pretty well then. Yeah, that was cool.
That was great. Well, I want to thank you for being here.
No, I thank you so much, and thank you for. I've heard so many good things about your teaching, and I'm not just trying to brush your.
I pay the students to tell me.
Well, money well spent.
Okay, thank you.